Every American taxpayer, every member of our armed forces can be proud of the fact that our country's generosity and the skill and service of our military helped arm and repel Russia's aggression in Ukraine. Now we have to accelerate that assistance package to help prepare Ukraine for Russia's offensive that's going to be more limited in terms of geography, but not in terms of brutality. Not in terms of brutality.
Today, President Joe Biden announced he's directing more than $1 billion in additional aid to Ukraine, $800 million in military assistance and heavy artillery weapons, and $500 million in direct economic assistance. President Biden also shared his new plans to send Congress another budget request next month to, quote, keep weapons and ammunition flowing without interruption to Ukraine. Joining us now, Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut. He's a member of the House Intelligence Committee. He and a bipartisan group of colleagues met today with the Ukrainian Prime Minister in D.C. You don't say a lot about this publicly, but I know you are helping, and you are helping with what is a goal of the President of the United States to get Ukraine the weapons they need. And you're helping, I think, the administration understand what exactly it is that the Ukrainians want and need. So, again, without impeding the process or disclosing anything, what is it that they still want and need that we haven't delivered yet? And can you just help us sort of understand why that process can feel like it takes a long time?
Yeah, sure, Nicole. And yes, 4 hours ago, there was a remarkable meeting with the Prime Minister of Ukraine, the ambassador, with the Speaker, the Majority Leader. And I'll tell you, it was a meeting unlike any meeting I have had, in as much as, usually these meetings are very protocol oriented. Your Excellency, this, more tea, more coffee. This was, I'd never seen anything quite like it. 20 minutes, and I've got 4 pages of notes here on particular kinds of ammunition, of the transition away from Soviet weaponry and Soviet caliber artillery rounds to NATO caliber artillery rounds. We're obviously not going to get too specific on that point. But the point I'm trying to make to you here was that I was really taken aback by how very serious the Ukrainians are about understanding the precise assets and the precise things they need us to do to get to a point of victory. And it wasn't all ammunition, artillery, by the way. It was also additional sanctions we might impose. It was also what we need Europe to do with respect to energy. It was truly something you don't see on Capitol Hill all that often, but a very productive working meeting.
What can you tell us in the meeting about what they are suffering on an hour-to-hour basis? I mean, I was struck by something President Zelensky said last week, and it was in the context of Mariupol. And he said 4 hours is life and death in Mariupol. There are people starving to death in sort of a span of 4 hours. So, and I think what Zelensky was doing was trying to acknowledge that these conversations and these meetings are part of a process, but that on the battlefield, and especially with civilians clearly being targeted by the Russians, hours and days mean life and death in large swaths of that country. Just tell me how they articulate the urgency and the need for speed.
Well, first of all, I can't tell you what it's like to sit across the table, and this has happened several times now on Capitol Hill, from people whose families are still very much at risk from being killed right now by a bomb or a missile. And we do focus on Mariupol. We focus on the obscenities that were perpetrated in Bucha. But if you're in the west of the country, if you're in Lviv right now, as happened just 48 hours ago, a missile can come down and create fatalities where you think you're not close by. So, I mean, there's no place safe for civilians in Ukraine. The Prime Minister made the point that Ukrainian civilians, and this is really important, are not dying as a result of what the military in such sort of stark fashion calls collateral damage. They are being targeted. They are being targeted because it is part of Russian doctrine to try to break the morale and the will of a people by committing the kinds of atrocities that are not just happening in Mariupol, but which are just random missiles being fired into population centers in places like Lviv. And so, again, it was just an absolutely remarkable meeting with people who are dedicated to do everything they need to do to get this done.
I mean, what you just said is so important to understanding that call last Friday from President Zelensky on the Biden administration to consider designating Russia as a state sponsor of terror. Do you believe the Ukrainian civilian population is being terrorized?
It's not a question of belief, Nicole. I don't accept the question. We see the photographs. We see the photographs of dead families killed by mortars. We know the facts and have seen the photographs of deliberate targeting of civilians cowering in a theater where they've taken the time to write the word children outside of that theater. The Russians, for their abysmal military performance, are sophisticated military. You don't, and every military, of course, makes mistakes, and sadly, in every single war, civilians die. But the Russians are targeting this. It's not my opinion. You just need to look at any photograph coming out of Ukraine to know that the targeting of civilians is a big part of the Russian effort there.
Should Russia be designated a state sponsor of terror?
That's a really good question. I will tell you one thing. We can make a little news here, and I don't think she would object to me reporting on it, but the Speaker of the House certainly said so 4 hours ago. Now, obviously, there's complexities here, right? When you designate somebody as a state sponsor of terrorism, you forbid the purchase, for example, of Germany buying gas. But I will tell you that the feeling in the room, led by the Speaker, was that we need to, yes, designate them in whatever way is consistent with obviously not hurting the Europeans and their need for energy, but that really, doesn't hold back in any way on the sanctions that have to completely isolate and break the Russian economy for this to end.
And you're right that the technical standard has been met. And I asked State Department spokesman Ned Price about this earlier in the week, and he wouldn't pull back the curtain on the process at all. But you're correct to refute the premise of the question. The facts aren't in dispute by anyone other than Vladimir Putin and his sort of the apparatus of state media. Do you think the president sees it that way? And would you predict that the president would move toward a designation on state sponsorship of terror for Vladimir Putin?
Well, we've got some unpacking to do, because what's important is not necessarily precisely what we call it. What's important is that we do a lot more. And I do think that the United States has done spectacular amounts of contributions of weaponry and everything. I do think we could lean into this a little bit more. This $800 million package, of course, is the first time we've seen helicopters provided, right? In my own personal opinion, unconstrained by not working for the State Department or the Department of Defense, I think those should have come sooner. But the point is, in addition to those weapons, Nicole, we need to do more on the sanction side, because the Ukrainians may continue to hold off the Russians, but they're not at the end of the day going to completely destroy the Russian military. The only way this war stops is if the Russian people say enough. And the only way that happens is if the economy is so broken that they see the costs of Putin's madness. And, of course, if we can counter the propaganda and the misinformation that Putin and his people are feeding the Russians about how glorious and how wonderful this thing is. Those two things need to happen, or this will drag on a lot longer than it needs to.